I actually don't have my book that came out last year, which is called He Is Walking Wider, my first full-length poetry book. But I'll be reading poems that are mostly from there. And one of my blurbs in the back said that they particularly liked my poems about family members. So I'll just give just a brief, sentence or two about the poems that I'm going to be reading about different family members. And this one's an early one. It's called She, and it's about my mother-in-law, who was a Holocaust victim. She ran away in the forest, and we really couldn't communicate much in English. So I basically was able to observe her mostly, and it's called She, and it appeared, I believe, a long time ago in Kansas Quarterly, which is a now defunct journal. She works from the gut out, like one of those actors who bends from the knees. No one knows how she goes about her days, except me. I know. Her husband is dead and her son works. She cooks meat every day. Her son likes meat every day. Meat with skin and fat, potted and fried meat. She sweats over the flames. She never moves away. Her house is disorder. She despises order, being gay. But when she cleans, she cleans in a fever. When she is done, she sits in parks and stares at trees. Unconsciously, she spreads her legs. She spends her days freely. She does not think a lot. I do not live like this woman, being miserly. And it's funny thinking back on this poem. I hope it didn't come across cruelly, because when you are running away from the Nazis and the Holocaust, you're not taught the finer things, like how to be a lady and sit with your legs close together. The next poem I'm writing, I'm going to be reciting is See Her Hands How They Plait. And it's about watching my daughter, now grown, as she slept. And there's lots of poems, I believe. There's a Yeats one, a Galway Cannell one, and I'm sure there are tons of other poems. It's a popular subject. See her hands how they plait beneath her head as she sleeps. She works upon it like some field that might yield ripe red grapes, if she works hard enough, which she always does. See her arms as she reaches out steadily upon her bed sheets, always going. She wants so much, this child. The raw force impels her up, impels her to the sun. Sometimes she grabs at me as if I am some tattered cloth, grabs at my shoulder, my thigh with great force. Like some mythic creature, she cannot be shaken off. Do not give her a life of vague longings, watching the world from room corners, her body bowed, but let her not run too fast into a window as she once did. The scar on her forehead, which she displays proudly, her diadem. Let the world rise when she enters the room, absorb her, but not fully, pulsate with her, watch her, emerge, converge, not to blend or efface, but to brace the world with her hand, band it like a bird, give voice to it without singing, to stand, withstand, loved, be beloved, to trace the world with her finger and tread upon it, enter it, as if for the first time with grace, elemental, a fantast, walking into the wind, a singer in the dark, as tall as the eastern pine, as ancient. And, since you're from the West Coast, I will tell you, I read somewhere that the eastern pine is the tallest tree east of the Mississippi. So you've got some real biggies, but we don't grow them as big. The next poem is a poem about my father, who was a salesman, but he, unlike Willie Loman, he was a rather successful salesman and small business owner. And I wrote this poem after he died some years ago, but what I found it was very therapeutic. So there were a lot of tears shed when I wrote this poem, and sometimes of inspiration if something can, bring you to tears while writing it. Dad, 1. In mirrored showrooms, swatches hung from your broad fingers, lace, Venetian, Alanson, redolent of royalty, of foreign places, claret, night navy, the season's colors. Between 36th Street and 4th and 40th, Broadway and 8th Avenues, you were known. 2, you went door to door, office to office, paper grip swirling, subway spuming below. Jack, you'd say to a man like yourself, small, barrel chested. You remember my daughter, my middle one? 3. And Jack would smile and say how pretty I was and how big I'd grown. In high ceilinged warehouses, we'd walk down aisles clogged with women's blouses, past dark eyed women sewing who'd look up and smile. 4, you were 75 and still the first one on the train every day, sometimes darkness, battered attaché beside you. Don't worry, I'll get you the goods, you promised the buyers, and you did, Dad. Lace salesman, provider, but it was getting harder. Nat, I can't see you now, a much younger man said. Your presence and impertinence, quote, the young bucks, I think you called them, sons of business owners, mostly. 5, pushed out by the man you brought in, treated like a son, you saw your end, craved it. Death hung nearby, heavy curtain upon a scanty rod. 6, now retired, you visited gardens, mansions, standing behind velvet ropes. We heard stories of captains of industries, your wives and the wives and average sons, you liked that. Still other days we drove around the world pink, magnolias thick with buds in a museum. I posed you under red goon canvas, bristling alive under stars. 7, your last year was hard. Something had bored into your core, saw you quietly reeling, your stride now a shamble, shoulders a universal shrug. Oh, Papa, why couldn't I see you and not given to observations of the natural world? Although each spring you heralded the arrival of the robins, amazing, you'd say, how they always know to come. You drifted through shopping malls, anonymous, the mind still incisive. 8, you had been in the intensive care unit many times, always the least sick, your heartbeat irregular, slow, and I'd say, at least you don't look like them, the alone insensate ones, and you'd ask, did you write the speech yet? It was our joke, our soft shoe, and I told you, nope. 9, but now it was time. In the emergency room, I saw a tick pulse in your cheek where it hadn't pulsed for a generation. And as the hours charged into muzzy night, dawn greeted me an indiscriminate halloo. Your tongue now hard, thick, black, a parrot's. Eyes once cerulean, now a moonless Atlantic. Oh, inchoate world of my ancient silent keening. 10, sometimes I hear you, not the voice, though. Never drive so fast you can't stop if a child ran into the street. Or, did you mean my life? You stopped at a red light. Your heart stopped. You went door to door, office to office. Your world was small, as I have grown smaller, as the world has, alone. I'll just mute myself.
I'm going to start by reading from my collection, which is called A Black Odyssey. I'm a performance poet, and this was my attempt to pull together all my performance poems as well as some other poems. It's a poetic memoir, but I was able to structure it based on Homer's Odyssey. My take on Homer's Odyssey is that it is an allegory. It's a journey of a person towards what I would call authenticity, and all the various challenges that Odysseus encounters are symbolic representations of that particular archetype would encounter on his way to become authentic. And I can talk about that a little bit later on. I thought I'd start by reading a poem from the chapter that's titled A Poet Petitions His Muse. Of course, when you're talking about epic poetry, you start off with invoking inspiration from the muse. So this one is titled Invocation. If I could rub this midnight lamp and win 3 wishes for my words, the first I'd wish is for thy will to pump my heart, and through my pen thy wisdom spill for sentences like circling birds. To be your stamp is my prime wish, to wrestle true through mud and mire, not like the priest who idles books, but as a soiled prophet, a wrestler of tigers, a Samson wielding syllables that name the beast, sweep clear the few, that ripple like rivers, that sigh. As to a second wish, I'd wish upon each page your flow and grace, that from my pen in beauty skirt your sway, your swish, your pining winds might pierce the age, your tall oaks cry. In such beauty, serene, sublime, that ruffles waves and whitens clouds, dip my ink, mirror creation. My paragraphs please harmonize with eagles proud, give wings to my imagination, yours make mine. Then, should I hazard one last wish to nouns and verbs and adjectives, I'd wish love's pure consonants, for vowels round as wedding rings, for marriage twixt sound and substance, in form caressed, creator kissed. Or does this wish them all embrace? Perhaps a pen in love with words, with content wrapped in lovers' vows, need not invoke your confidence. Perhaps in love, my words right placed will win your will, your love, your grace. So I sort of like that because it establishes what I hope to achieve as a poet. If you're familiar with the story of the Odyssey, it does not start with Odysseus. It starts with Telemachus. And Telemachus actually sets out to look for his father, or at least get word for his father. And to me, allegorically, Telemachus is setting out on the journey towards manhood. I'm going to read a poem now from the chapter titled Polyphemus. Polyphemus, of course, is the Cyclops, the giant Cyclops. What Polyphemus represents to me is men who would hurt all mankind just to save their own, to borrow a line from several R&B songs. These are people who don't care about anyone else. As long as they have their own, they don't mind who they hurt. To my mind, he's got one eye because he's narrow-minded, and he's a giant because unfortunately the world is full of people who would hurt all mankind just to save their own. So this is in the chapter Polyphemus. This one is titled When the Eyes Lie. And I should mention that the word eye can be spelled 3 ways. E-Y-E, as in the eye you see with, the letter I, as in me, myself, and I, and then I, as in all those in favor, say I. And I use all 3 spellings throughout this poem. What do you do when the eyes lie? When common decency is strung out on morphine and children dangle from limbs that bleed, blood oozing like money down the gutter of their dreams? What do you do when eyes are held hostage, when juries deliberate over forks and spoons in kitchens you have only known by going down on your knees, when babies are feast for flies and hopelessness becomes another man's meat? What do you do when the eyes lie? When the suits that once rebelled over the tax on tea refuse to walk with the dog that is their darker selves, and instead toss bones at rumors of its humanity? What do you do when eyes wax blind, when prostitutes and killers outstrip the weeds, when the obvious is slapped in jails, raped from behind, let out on good behavior after learning to mimic proper legalese? What do you do when the eyes lie, when fear conspires to drug the truth, when law becomes its lackey and hatred does a few Hail Marys before returning to patrol the streets? And what do you do when the babies cry, when brains pound the pavement and drive-by shootings offer your Einsteins their only relief? What do you do when the eyes lie? Now I'm going to jump to the chapter titled Songs of the Sirens. For me, what the sirens represent are distractions. You know, as you go along your journey, you see all these very beautiful, these very charming women, and you abandon your journey to pursue one of them and so on. So that's what the sirens represent to me. And so this poem is in the chapter Songs of the Sirens. And this is titled The Shadow of Venus. Sea spouts jet mist pushing upward out of rock. Sunshine suckles your milky shoulders. Volcanoes rumble but won't erupt. Still, the way you wear your day determines the dream's look. A bleeding heart rattles against cold cage, bold yet sunken like ships whose full moon lonely lips alone break the undulating surface where surf, salt, indecision, drift. The shadow of Venus casts a wide net. Fishermen dream of abandoning their fishes. They rock to and fro, the wet bottoms of their boats sloshing in rhythm to their lack of understanding, with not even stars to guide them, just the heartbeat of the naked soul. The shadow of Venus looms in pink puffed clouds, Persephone cleaning house, setting table, Diana weeding her tangled wilderness, while Athena half listens to lieutenants in heated conversation. Rocking on her patient porch, she resumes her reading, now and then gazing outward, now and then peering 1,000 miles inward. When the lieutenants leave, Ceres chimes from a full raised window. Chairs scrape, pans rattle, voices clang, smiles are passed from plate to plate, each aroma a moment to be savored. Vesta lights her fire in the hearth, while Hera, at the head of her table, hums melodiously as she braids the moonlight that bounces across the black inky bay, where raft-born Odysseus stares at a lighted window and the dark-haired figure haloed in its homely frame. Now I'm going to jump to the chapter titled Ithaca. So imagine Odysseus has gone through most of his trials and he's coming into himself and he finally lands back on his island. And this poem is one of the things that he finds when he lands. This is titled The Rape, and it's in, as I said, the chapter, The Sands of Ithaca. She was like God to me. A huge woman with breasts the size of cows and arms as wide as trees. The hair on her arms bristled like pine needles. She smelled of lilacs and evergreen. And when she giggled, laughter and bubbles foamed from her mouth as natural as trout tumbling in a freshwater stream. She was like God to me. I would sit for hours on her pregnant belly and gaze into eyes at once blue and gray and brown and green. I would hike upon her mountainous bosom, roll down her soft brown flesh, make snowmen from her dandruff, and find myself where I had been not lost, only hidden. She was God and Mary and Jesus to me. And now she lay in a hospital bed, propped up on pillows while tubes like tentacles pierced her blotched, bruised flesh. Her eyes puffed and cut where hours before they bled. They had dragged her to an alley, these ants who call themselves men, whose priests genuflect to books and deeds that read she belongs to them to do with whatsoever they please. So they nibbled at her flesh, gnawed the back of her neck, drilled for her blood to run their machines, till they flattened her breasts, and then fought wars over the right to devour what little was left. Yet she, who was like God to me, smiled, even though to smile was to strain. And she reached to pluck the tear from my cheek, for it was not her fate, but mine she feared. She, who is God to me. And the last poem I'm going to do in this book, if I can find it, it's just in a final chapter. Odysseus has gone through all his trials. He is reunited with Penelope and vanquished his the suitors. This is in the last chapter titled Warriors Farewell. And this is titled Perambulation. He walked. He walked in January where grounds were frozen. He walked where wind wore teeth, its tarted overbite pressed against his window pane. Icicles drip, 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 dripping, silver muffled screams. He walked when hurricanes blew young, when bees sang and birds with melodies stung. He walked through buzz and babel, teetering as earth quaked, marching to the heartbeats of each different ache. He walked where skies were blue, eyes bluer, souls bluer still, where tornadoes scribbled in fine point cursive letters of hope, divided by disappointment, then multiplied by zero. Now you can't divide by zero, his teacher said. You can't, but the world could. He walked when hurricanes were full blown, when flowers touted their full regalia and words like roses wilted a day or two after spreading legs full bloom. He walked where love and hate were college professors shaking their rulers, gazing over bifocal lenses. He walked where blinding beaches singed his toes as the sun rode him bareback and moon pressed down his heavy, wet shoulders. He walked up ponderous hills, down existential mountains where leaves exploded and trees fell in forests unnoticed and philosophers disbelieved. He walked him and hunger, singing God Bless America, off key, knocking door to door on Halloween, dressed in his compromises, opening wide a bag of barely recognizable dreams. He walked, scraping his knuckles, tossing bits of his flesh at cackling geese. He walked till the gods of pro and con lay fat and lazy, though unappeased, as he walked the Thanksgiving turkey, sifting through potatoes, carrots, and peas for the gobble, gobble, gobble that would make okay what by any other name would still be sung. My country, 'tis of greed. He walked till Wall Street fell the last Christmas tree. And still he walked, dragging his feet, casket heaved on one shoulder, flicking his butt at a white-haired priest as he leaned on a shovel, patiently waiting for the gravedigger to take a pee. And he walked as stars fell like snowflakes, galaxies melted like ice cream, God's long tongue licking his face. He walked till nothingness became his first, his last, and middle name. And still he walked up and down that split second called eternity. He moonwalked and, stubbing his toe on the Big Bang, somersaulted, landing once again on her infinite feet. Pausing only long enough to tie a shoelace, she gobbledygooked her way into another screaming, squirming birthday suit, checking her compass, smearing on mascara, makeup, and sunscreen as she continued her walk across the four walls of the sky's limitless face, slipping on sidewalks of stars and rain as she struggled to remember to not forget to remember something half vaguely forgotten, something teetering on the edge of her nervous restlessness, just beyond her spiritual reach. Something about an infinite universe, infinite space. Something about an infinite universe, alive with death and decay. Something about an infinite universe, God, a schizophrenic you never outwit. Something about an infinite universe with all the comforts of Dante's Inferno, and never, never, ever a permanent place to sit. So that's A Black Odyssey. I'm switching to my novel, The Perfect Stranger. It is, the Library of Congress calls it absurdist satire, which is a very fair description. It has a lot of absurdity going on in it. But there's also a very serious side to it. I see it as a parable stuffed inside a social satire. The parable is a man who's only known by the initial S comes into town looking for someone that he must find. His dilemma is he doesn't know who that person is. He manages to rent the apartment of a character by the name of C.D. Smollett. Smollett happens to be the owner of the town's most successful bank and pizzeria. And Smollett decides that he is going to also hire S as an assistant janitor. So this scene is after Smollett has proposed this idea to the bank's regular janitor, whose name is Stubbs Farrago. What the Samuel Hill I need an assistant for? Stubbs Farrago frowned, leaning on his mop and challenging the banker with a hard, suspicious stare. The bank janitor and the bank president each stood their ground, said ground being the basement of the Smollett First Pedestal Bank and Pizzeria. A few yards away, S stared at his new shoes, hands clasped behind his back. Now, Mr. Smollett urged, placing a friendly set of fat fingers on the janitor's stiff shoulder, chewing on a thought before forcing a wan smile. In the 17 years you've been with us, you've never had an assistant. Think of all the wisdom, the skill, the experience, the know-how you've accumulated. Don't you think it's time you pass some of that precocious wisdom on to a younger generation of up-and-coming maintenance engineers? Hail, Mr. Smollett, meaning no disneglect, but he ain't even one of us. Stubbs extended the arm that held the mop in the general direction of S. S stood motionless as the banker discussed the pros and the janitor countered with the cons of creating the coveted position of assistant janitor. True, he's not one of us now, the financial officer conceded, but who's to say what he can do? You teach him the skills of wielding a mop, the up and down stroke, the back and forth maneuver, the circular sweep, the figure eight. and I'll attend to his moral edification. Between you and me, we'll forge him into something any bank would be honored to have attending to its floors and polishing its doorknobs. What do you say, Stubbs? The banker pulled on the key dangling around his neck. S watched the two men, the skinny one in the gray uniform jangling a thick set of keys, the banker in his 5.5-piece suit fingering the single key. Both stood near a door painted with the ominous warning for private, for no one only, keep out, this means you. It ain't right, Mr. Smollett. I remember how I had to beg for weeks to get this here job. Back then I was competing with my second cousin, and if it wasn't for me accidental like chopping off a few of his fingers with that machete I happened to be carrying, in case I ran into a watermelon or something, you might have hired him instead. Now this fella just comes in off the street, no references, no experience, and you hire him on the spot. Listen, the banker whispered, pulling his employee to one side. I know it seems strange, me wanting to hire one of them. Both men locked eyes, then glanced over at S before locking eyes again. But I have a good reason. This here is selection year, right? Doesn't it seem strange one of these guys suddenly appears in our town? Receiving no answer, the banker repeated the question. Doesn't it? Smollett reached in his coat pocket, producing a full set of keys more formidable than the measly set the janitor held. The two men jangled their keys in unison. Stubbs finally nodded, though barely. What I'm thinking, his superior continued, is there's a conspiracy afoot, perhaps precipitated by a more radical faction of dregs, the ones that give the rest of your kind a bad name. Where there's one of these guys, the banker indicated S, there's got to be more. You follow? Again, Stubbs nodded. Now, suppose we hire one, sort of like a test dummy, and suppose he can't cut the mustard, like everything he does is wrong, and we make his life sheer hell. Do you think he'll be running back to his buddies and saying, come on, I know where we can get jobs and maybe even impregnate a few poor men's daughters? You get my drift? Loud and clear, Stubbs responded, grabbing his mop handle by both hands. You can count on me, Mr. Smollett. I'll teach this guy everything he needs to know to be a miserable failure. I know you're the man to do it, the banker smiled, resting a hand on the janitor's shoulder. Only be subtle. Think of it like fishing. You don't pounce on a fish right away. You pretend to be going along with its plan to steal your worm. And just when it thinks it's gonna get away scot-free, wham, you reel it in. The banker pulled the cigar from his breast pocket, broke it in half, and handed the smaller half to the janitor. As my great-grandpapa used to say, it ain't torture if it's fast and painless. I gets your drift, Stubbs confirmed, momentarily resting his chin on the two hands clutching the mop, the half a cigar pressed between his lips. Come here, son, he called to S. S approached cautiously, looking from banker to janitor to banker, his look more a plea for mercy than an expression of confidence. So yous wants to learn my job, does you? S nodded unenthusiastically. Well, you done chosen yourself a fruitful career. Anywhere you goes, there are floors to be swept, halls to mop, linoleum to be scrubbed, scoured, and waxed, shelves to be dusted, trash cans to be emptied. You master these skills, and there ain't nowheres yous can't go, provided you got the right set of keys. The janitor jangled his keys proudly. Come here now. Let's first introduce you to your new co-workers, bleach, pneumonia, and scouring detergent. I'm sure you and the fellas will get along famously. And that's it. Thank you all for listening.
All right. The first poem that I have is commemorative of my experience with psychiatrists. So it's called an ode to a psychiatrist. Now, this is located in the Bay Area, the peninsula south of San Francisco. The El Camino Hospital mental health doctor, the one that treats aberrant human behavior, is Simran Singh, a matter-of-fact caregiver. 20 years have built up expertise in her to winnow malingering chaff from true despair, bear self-loathing, stigma from disorder. As Yelp will reveal, some patients flee her, a treatment being directed to the matter that ails them, words, honeyed butter, rather sparse. To watch for this truth, testimony, I offer my own experience. A natty dresser, her personality was an initial shocker, transference of my fear of a strict third-grade teacher. Her assertion that she would not medication alter at first visit, I took to imply as a harbinger of imminent change. My twinge of fear, its reason that as blurted out to her, she noted down. Her manner a little severe, impassive nonetheless. Subsequently, she did inquire from son mine odd behavior to the breakdown prior. Facts so gleaned with observations put together led to this delicately phrased tender. She wished I would let her lithium for me order. It would greatly assist in curing my disorder. I concurred, it did to me myself restore. This excellent physician ignores malicious slander, presses forward her mission to treat, to cure. That's one. And here's the second one, which is which essentially is madness in a different direction. All right, that was actual madness. This is madness in a different direction, and you'll find out pretty soon what the direction is. It goes like this. The title is Estella Affirms. Gracious lady, educated, lovely, accomplished in life's prime. Fortunate am I indeed for your love on me lavished. For your command, an affirmation of your love is penned. I, Estella, in the budding of my love, for you, in the unfolding of my love, cherish this gift of my Creator above, pledge to nourish, sustain this love. Between our hearts, a bridge we build, faith, hope, trust, love, reality spanned. Despite life's hard knocks, woefully sustained, burned, yet with arms fully outstretched. Faith that the mind's vision is unclouded by desire, its truth voiced, unpremeditated, without adverse judgment received. Human limitations to love, revealed, accepted. Why hold on to hope, risk being duped? Why upset the even tenor of a life half lived? Hope promises to render it multi-hued, yellowed with joy, royally purpled. Let mutual trust bless our love with bliss. The pain of absence cause no jealous twinge. The thorns of love's roses be forgotten in our caresses. Today the spring in our hearts is love. Tomorrow let our heart's summer be love. When the leaves fall, tender be our love. In winter amidst the gray, bright be our love. Reality tears this silken web apart. When duty intervenes, be not distraught by broken trysts. The pain, our shared lot, we bear together. So is our web rebuilt. Thank you.
Thank you. A few beers. So, okay, this is a new one I've written here this last little while. I call it Shadow. Stepped into an elevator. the other day, tucked in the corner like an anchor, was a tall, slim gentleman, standing still, without a will, a husked face with no thoughts, eyes distraught, staring straight ahead, wearing a stowaway hat with dusky, rusty coat, also weighed down with old army boots with the threads shooting out. Very edgy, hand shaky. With a throaty voice, he speaks out, I lost my shadow. I felt the footsteps walk away the other day. Must find it before tomorrow, or it will be a widow's shadow. It took me by surprise. That was no lie. Before another thought, the elevator stops. The door opens to let me out. Beside me is my shadow. It's a soul to me, with a promise not to let go before the light takes it away. Okay, for my next one, this one I written a little while ago there. It's called A Park Bench Spectacle. A messenger in a body between time. A park bench spectacle. A rich man's wallet beside his feet, with words with many meanings escaping in the cracks of the pavement. Breathing time. Reading an old newspaper printed on the road. Sees a photograph of somebody trying to make a grave. It's a face that he has seen before. Many people walking by, moving to find their way, hoping to have their story told in the morning paper. Looks at his watch, picks up his rich man's wallet, walks towards the green concrete trees, scheming tomorrow's newspaper. Thank you.